So welcome everybody to the, I don't know, 10th, 12th, something in the co-housing and the coronavirus series that we threw together in response to this pandemic. So this series is hosted or produced, or I'm not quite sure how to say that, by the Co-Housing Association of the US. We do our best to connect people, offer education, offer resources. If you're not familiar with our website, cohousing.org, there is an absolute ton of information on there and a really nice green contact us button if you are not finding what you're looking for. I'd like to remind everybody today is a mid-year Giving Tuesday thing. So this is a nationwide campaign of nonprofit organizations requesting financial support to be able to continue to do the things that we do. And the national folks that put together created the Giving Tuesday campaign decided that this year doing one in May was necessary to keep many organizations afloat. So I will plug a link into the chat if you would like to give. We always appreciate that. I wanted to let everybody know about the upcoming online conference that Coho US is putting on. It's part of the Simple series. It is the Heart of Community, and I will put the link to the part of our website that talks about what sessions are being offered, how to register, who the speakers are, all that kind of good stuff. It's going to be a fantastic conference with keynote speaker Mary Gaylord, who is who is she? She is the program manager of a national organization called Living Room Conversations, which is an organization that gets people together to talk about tricky topics and people from opposing sides to be able to communicate in a safe space. It's pretty amazing. So that'll be good. What else? I think that's all the general points I wanted to say. I'm Karin Hoskin, the Executive Director of Coho US. With us tonight is Karen Gimnig, the Communications Director for the Association, and Megan Shea is with us tonight. She is one of our board members, and Karen and Megan are actually facilitating or presenting, doing the magic for tonight. So whenever you guys are ready, you're up.
Great. I think we're kind of enabling all of us to make some magic. Tonight's going to be really participatory, and it's really just a chance to reflect on some of the experiences that we've had either in traditional face-to-face experiences with our groups or potentially virtually that have enabled us to really connected to one another. And think about how we can translate those to what your group needs right now. Because in my day job, I'm a program director of an organization, a nonprofit, and something that I hear all the time is that content is readily available, right? If there's ever a topic that you wanted to learn about, a language you wanted to learn, like you probably have the time, and if you're on this call, you have the internet capacity to do that research. What's really rare and valuable right now is connections and relationships. And this shows up all over the place. It shows up for anybody who's looking for a job, and it shows up for us as people who just want to connect interpersonally, and also shows up in terms of all of the other projects that we had going in our lives before COVID changed the course of the year. So this discussion that we're going to have today is really about how you cultivate those moments of deep connection and relationship building. And I'm kind of a traditionalist. I mean, I like getting together with people in person. Call me crazy, but I wasn't ready to believe that this could actually happen until I had a number of pretty powerful experiences where very well facilitated things happened in a virtual setting that enabled me to feel closer and go deeper with people than I think we would have if we were in person. So before we pass it over to Karen and start practicing this, I wanted to ask the group, and I hope you'll unmute yourself when you're ready to talk, about what experiences you've had in in-person meetings that really increased your feeling of connection to the other people that were there. What were they like? What happened? If you'd prefer, feel free to chat anything into the chat function, which is at the very bottom of the screen. Could be small things like, you know, sharing the same piece of food, well, the same meal at the same time, or something
Sorry,
facilitated.
Megan, are you wanting us to write this in the chat box?
You can either write it or speak it. I'm just
Oh,
curious to hear what has enabled that sense of connection for you.
I'll share that I was in a conference once that had like 1,500 people or something. It was a large conference, and they had us break into a group of 3 people, so the person on either side essentially, and have a conversation. I can't remember what the prompt was, but it was really incredible to be in this ginormous ballroom of hundreds of people and feeling really connected and having a really solid 10-minute conversation or whatever it was.
It's a great example. Time goes slower when we're connecting over a computer because we're not having the same physiological rushes that we have when we're physically proximate to people. So even a short focused period of time virtually can really enable us to pay attention to one another and to go deep. If you were in that 1,500 person room, there were a ton of distractions and noises around and stimulating. But you can use breakout rooms, which we'll be doing later, to show how intimately you can have a moment of connection with a small number of other people and really focus on those relationships online.
Lori?
I think I agree. It just dawned on me why this is kind of working for me. I'm just concentrating on what one person is saying. In a group, there are distractions. It's hard to really concentrate. So I just concentrate on the yellow box person, and it seems to, that's interesting. Yeah.
Jenny, I think I saw a hand.
Yeah, for me, it's potlucks, sharing food, and the best ones have been when people talked about the dishes that they brought and why they brought them and what connection there was with, you know, the meaning in the dish that they brought.
Yeah, sharing stories is a really powerful tool, whether you're in person or otherwise. I've heard about other kinds of groups where they've enabled people to share that same moment of like everybody's digging into the lasagna at the same time by either having a recipe that people are encouraged to all make and eat at the same occasion, or you know, you can, if you're in the same city, you can actually, you know, either get food delivered or somebody might actually volunteer to provide that same meal, just so that people feel that sense of specialness. I think sometimes we forget that we still do have a U.S. Postal Service. So, you know, if you want everybody to like have the same object that they're reflecting on while they're talking, you know, you can make that happen. And it surprisingly is kind of nice to say, okay, everybody hold your elephant right now. And people do, and it feels, that kind of connection actually can work.
I was involved with during 2012, which was a while ago. I was involved with doing some work around the International Year of Cooperatives in Canada, and we had arranged that there was going to be a launch day, and it was going to be January 12th, 2012, and we had got 12 sites in Alberta that were all going to be launching at the same time. And we were connected through old technology then, right? We couldn't do Zoom because Zoom wasn't around then. But one of the things we did was we encouraged everybody to get a cake to celebrate this event, this launch. And then we all cut our cakes at each of the different sites at the same time, right? And so it gave everybody a sense of being part of this party that was happening across the kind of entire province. And that was pretty cool.
Roger, do you have one as well?
Yeah, well, I can't remember them off the top of my head, but I've been in a group that meets once a year, kind of a conference, and there's a bunch of us 20 of us who help run the conference, and every year we show up early and do icebreakers. And there's a particular person who's amazing. He's got like this repertoire of like 15 different icebreakers, and we'll do 2 or 3, and they're fantastic. They're really things that just kind of like I used to. Like, someone would say, we're going to do an icebreaker, and I would groan because I go, oh gosh, it's going to be forced and whatever. But a well-done icebreaker where, you get people talking to each other about, playing a little game or whatever it is, really, really works to help people like warm up to each other and feel connected.
Yeah, I think you hit on at least 2 things that are really important. One is that the facilitator really matters, and happy to talk more about what makes for a great facilitator in an online context. But generally speaking, it's somebody who actually holds space and makes space for others rather than taking up a lot of it for themselves. But yeah, a great facilitator or one who's trusted by the participants in the group can make an exercise like that work incredibly well. And even really short icebreakers are effective. So sometimes I'll be in a setting and somebody will say, you just do a 1-word check-in or a 1-word checkout. And that actually is an equalizer, because the people who are inclined to talk will be given the same amount of space as the people who are the shyest and the least interested in maybe speaking on a video call like this. Something I've heard that I think is a good rule of thumb to keep in mind is that the amount of time that you devote to relationship building in a virtual context is kind of commensurate with how strong this group needs to be. And for co-housing, the answer is really strong. So rather than rushing right to the business piece of things, I've found that you can go further, faster by investing first in building some of that trust. So some of you were on this call last week that was more about like tips and tricks and tech platforms that can be helpful when it comes to virtual stuff so that it feels as net can be. I would encourage you to look back at that recording if you're interested in that topic. But just a couple of things that I wanted to share with us before I pass it over to Karen, and she leads us in an exercise that'll take quite some time, is just a few best practices in terms of virtual meetings. So one is really to keep it short. I don't know if you all feel this way, but it's the end of the day on the West Coast, and like virtual living drains a person more than it's harder to recharge our batteries. And so really keeping meetings short and focused around their purpose. Building relationships and connection and trust is an incredibly important purpose. If that's what you want to do, really focus on doing that one thing incredibly well, rather than trying to kind of, build trust while choosing your exterior window treatment options or something if you're in the design phase. Like, know what you're trying to do and focus on doing that one thing really well. And whenever possible, emphasize interaction as much as we possibly can. I think webinars have their limits where one person's just talking to many, like I am right now. The best virtual experiences that I've been at really shake up group dynamics. When your group is in person, there's probably some dynamics that are stale and that you dread, right? There's tensions, there's one person who just always brings up the same topic every time. Virtual formats really just deeply transform those old habits, and we show up in different ways. Some of the best ways that you can invite people to show up to your meetings with authenticity is also to think about a whole array of social and emotional learning styles. So I think that virtual meetings can actually be a really wonderful place for the shyer people in your community to be, because you don't have to raise your hand and stand up in front of the room. You can chat something into the chat if that's what you're more comfortable with. You can turn off your camera if you just don't have the juice for it right now. And then as much as possible, like encouraging, if you're you know your groups, you know what they're interested in. If normally you'd be taking a hike together, encourage people who want to be working in the garden while they're on the call. Or you know, if it's a long call and you can see that people their energy's flagging, like just ask everybody to get up and stretch or play a song, and you know, try to engage as many of your senses as possible in the virtual world. It'll enable more people to find a way to feel at ease. Because at their best, virtual meetings are also more accessible, right? You don't have to have a car to get there. They work with a lot of people's schedules. If you miss it, you can often listen to the recording. So it's actually a nice way to include more people if you include them in kind of in the techniques that make the meeting run. And I think that's it. I'm always just going to say over and over, just keep it really short. Give people time constraints. It's okay if you don't get to talk about everything, because this is such an exhausting time to be in the world. But giving people the chance to come together and connect is such a gift right now. So excited to do some of that with you for our time today.
So thanks, Megan. I think those are such good points. And I think part of what we're sort of drawing on here is that when we think about how to be connected online, we don't have to start from scratch. That an awful lot of what we do that has always connected us, like it's that same kind of stuff. But there is one particular aspect of online that I want to invite you to. We're going to do an exercise in a minute, but I want to do one more Zoom trick because I've just learned it and started using it. And no one will know whether you did this or not, so it's totally up to you, but I'm going to encourage you to try it out for this meeting. If you'll go to your little box on your Zoom screen, and there are, in the upper right of your little box, is a blue square with 3 white dots, and if you click on that and select the bottom option that says Hide Self View, you will no longer see yourself. And I find that this makes me more present. I am more conscious of the other person. And I'm also way less tired at the end of it. And I read this in an article, so I won't say I dreamed this up, but it's pretty, it seems to be pretty universally true that a lot of what is fatiguing for us about Zoom is noticing whether our hair is the way we like it or whatever is our thing that we look at about ourselves. So I'm going to encourage you to not be looking at yourself for this call and see how that experience is for you. If you're wanting to turn it back on, whether, you know, to see if your cat is doing weird tricks in the background or whatever you might want to know, it's in the upper right of your Zoom window. When you've turned your square off, you get an option to show self view in the upper right. So you can go back and forth. If you're feeling insecure, am I still on the camera? You want to see, you can turn it back on and turn it off again.
You know, I want to just add something. What happened when I took my self view off, physically, there was more room on the screen for everybody else. Everybody else got a little bigger. And it seems like that's a perfect metaphor for me getting out of the way, is more room for everybody else.
Oh yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's lovely.
But in order to speak, we have to get ourselves back in order to see our unmute button. Is that, oh no, I see where it is. Never mind. Got it.
Yep. Yep. There is still the mute button on the bottom, but it's not obviously on your square if your square isn't there anymore. So yeah, and speaker view is another way to do that if you want to just be paying attention to the one person who's speaking. So depending on how you choose, and that's again a personal choice. We don't know the difference, but so with that, when I think about the tools that I'm aware of for helping people connect, my absolute favorite, what I think is the most powerful, is a tool that comes from Imago relationships theory called mirroring. And it's part of the Imago dialogue. Several of you on the call have done this with me before, so this is your review session, an opportunity to practice. And it may be new for some of you. Most of WebChat number 2, way back, was on this topic, but it seemed worthy of bringing it back tonight to give you an experience of a sense of connection and how that can actually happen online, which is often surprising for folks, the depth of connection. It's a structured process. It has a lot in common with like active listening, if you've done that before. I am going to give you a link for instruction sheet. which I will also share and put up on my screen for a second. So you'll see it, but if you'll want it for when you're in the chat too. So we're gonna, or when we put you in breakout rooms, you'll want it. So you can open that, but I will pop it up on my screen for a minute to take a look at the structure. So the basic idea is that you're in two roles. So there's a sender and there's a receiver, and being really clear about who's who makes a huge difference. So if you're in the sender, you're the one speaking. If you're in the receiver, you're really volunteering to go hang out in the world of the sender, to go pay attention to what's going on with them and put your focus there. And then if you're wanting to go both ways, and this is what I'll suggest for the exercise tonight, then you'll switch roles and the other person will send and the other person receive, and so on. So the structure goes like this. I'm going to describe it quickly, and then I'm actually going to see if I can get two of you to demonstrate it for me. The sender says something. The receiver mirrors it back or says as close to the same thing as they can. So what I heard you say is, and then they say it as close to word for word as possible. And people often say, well, does it have to be word for word? And isn't it better if I put it into my own words? And I'll hang out after you do it and we can talk about why, but for sake of the exercise, I'm going to encourage you to try for word and not beat yourself up if your memory's not that good. Like, do your best at word for word, and it's totally fine if that's not quite what happens. And then once you've repeated it back, so I heard you say, then it's, you want to check, did I get you? And the goal here is, did I get you? Did I understand you? Did I get what you were trying to tell me? I didn't say, was I right? Because it turns out it's not about the accuracy of my memory. It's about, did I connect with you? Did I get you? And the sender then says, yes, you got me. Or they might say, what I really want you to hear is. So we're not saying, no, you didn't get me. We're just saying what I really want you to hear is, and that might just be a piece of it, or it might be all of it if it was missed entirely. And then the receiver would mirror that. So what I heard you say is, did I get you? And then, is there more? And that invitation piece, I think, is pretty profound. And that often is where the kind of deep connection happens. And so I'm going to give you a series of prompts, and you'll do this. You'll have a sender. The same sender will do all 4 prompts. The receiver will respond to each with their role. And then after all 4 prompts have happened, then you'll switch roles and do it the other way. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a minute, and I think we'll do just a little demo if I can get 2 volunteers that I can guide through a little demo of this. Do we have anyone feeling brave? Sarah will. Megan, can I volunteer you to work with Sarah? All right, so I try to make a really short little example. So Sarah, do you have a sender receiver preference, or Megan, do either of you?
No.
Okay, so Sarah will let you send and we'll let Megan receive. And I'm just gonna have you start with just a simple, for demonstration's sake, what I had for breakfast. So Sarah, you're gonna tell Megan what you had for breakfast, and Megan's gonna receive that and mirror it.
I had porridge for breakfast this morning.
What I heard you say.
I heard you say you had porridge for breakfast this morning.
I did. And it was a little special because my husband made it for me.
So I hear you say what made this porridge special is that your husband made it for you.
Mm-hmm. Did I get you?
Did I get you?
Yeah.
And is there more? And so Megan, just ask her, is there more?
Sure. Sarah, is there more?
No.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you both. So that's that. That's the that's the pattern. And if they had had more prompts, they would have gone through all of their prompts with Sarah still sending and Megan receiving, and then they'd switch at the end and do it back the other way. So the sheet that I shared with you has 4 prompts, and it has that structure on it. So if you have that dialogue sheet open, you can use that. And I imagine that Karen has been has been working on setting you up into pairs to go to breakout rooms. She's nodding. So I think we are ready. Yeah.
How do I open up the dialogue sheet? I don't.
So I put the link in the
you just
chat.
sent? Oh,
Yeah.
gotcha. See it. I see it.
And
Never
just
mind.
copy it into your.
Gotcha. No problem.
And I'll put the 4 prompts into the chat as well.
There is one room that's going to have 3 people. But Karen, Megan, it will be maybe one that you're in. I have to manually do it. Anyway, I'm going to break you guys out. Are you ready?
Ready. How long do we
Karen,
have?
I'm sorry, how long did you say?
So let's take about 15 minutes total. So that's about 7 minutes for each send. And Karen, if you're sending me into a breakout room, can you just broadcast a halfway point message?
Yeah.
And I will warn you all that broadcast messages often disappear faster than you read them. So when you see that message, it's a pretty good hint that you're at the halfway point, or you can watch the time. It's 30 minutes after the hour now. So at around 37 minutes after the hour, you'd want to switch if you haven't by then. And if you finish early, you can come back here. Karen will be here. And if I finish early, I'll be back. We'll see.
Okay, here we go.
So I think we're all back.
I am amused by that every time.
We all
When everybody comes
repopulate.
back and their little smiling faces pop up, I'm like, oh, hey.
So I'll encourage you to hide yourself again. Zoom unhides us every time we leave and come back or go to a breakout room. But I'll remind you that that's probably a good idea. And really what we're planning for the rest of the hour is just sort of your feedback and then any questions or experiences you want to share. But really to start with, how was that for you? How was that experience? Lori, unmute, please.
It was really good, and something I need to practice. I mean, I think I listen, but this way it makes sure. One thing I'm thinking that might be a good exercise. This was pretty easy for us to say 1 or 2 sentences and to reflect that back as I could remember. I think it might be an interesting exercise if someone talked for a while, a minute or so, and then you had to reflect the essence of what they said, because more of a test of whether you got the meaning. So just a thought.
Yep, and I would agree that both are useful. When you're in a one-on-one situation, I actually encourage you to chunk down to a couple of sentences or not a lot more than that. It does a lot of interesting things to sort of shorten that so you don't get this sort of run-on effect. And I think it creates a little better connection. On the other hand, what you're suggesting, I think, is incredibly powerful for a skill for facilitators to have in meetings, to be able to reflect an essence or what I call a summary mirror. Yes to both. And it is a brain building thing. If it was hard for you, it's because that part of your brain isn't used to functioning in that way. And the more you do it, like any part of your brain, it is something you can learn. So cool. Thanks for that idea, Lori. Other responses, reflections. How was it? Rains?
Thank you. It's delightful, and realized it's one of the things I've missed from being sheltering out of place, away from community, is having people around to do that kind of thing with, and more in person. But I did find that I reverted to my facilitator habit of deeper summary and metaphor, and I got feedback from my partner that I wasn't strictly following the instructions. I would try getting to the essence of what was being said, and which is good, getting away from the exact words, which I tend to hold on too much to, but it ends up with some different results.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's probably one of the most common questions I get when I teach this is, well, why can't I rephrase? And doesn't that make that person just know how well I understood them, that I could put it in different words? And that does sometimes work. And there are some people who like to be mirrored that way. It's not as many as you'd think, and not everyone will tell you. When couples do this, it's a pattern that's been recognized that in particular, wives like to rephrase and husbands don't want to be rephrased, that there can be a tendency for it to come off as, I can say it better than you did. And that doesn't make people feel connected and gotten. So the measure of success is not whether you got the words right. The measure of success is whether there's a sense of connection. And I'm going to tell you that having the skill that you can give it back word for word is really worth having. So I think it's worth practicing. And if you don't know, it's a better bet. You certainly can, and I will sometimes say, I'm going to mirror that back in slightly different words, and I just want to make sure I'm still getting you, and you can sort of draw attention to, I'm not trying to say it better than you, I'm trying to check my understanding, or, I don't think I remembered it quite right, I'm going to give you what I did remember, and you and see if I actually got it. Like, those are all kosher, that you want to make really sure you're not sort of giving that, well, I know it better than you do feeling, which darn sneaks in so fast. And when you use their words, it protects you against that. So, so that's a cool piece of feedback, Rains. Thank you. Roger, I think you had something?
Yeah, I have a comment and then 2 questions if I can remember my own thoughts. The comment is, I remember doing this exercise once before. Dale was my partner, and I mentioned this to him. Sorry, Dale. But I remember doing this before, and the person we were in a group of people in person, and 2 people volunteered to do this in front of us, and the husband of the pair kind of scoffed in the beginning, saying, "I'm just going to repeat what you said. How is that therapeutic?" And he had such a difficult time actually doing it that by the end it impressed on him like how important that skill is and how it's not just a simple thing. And I notice that every time I try to do it as well. It's really hard, and it does make a lot of difference. That's the comment. The questions are, I guess one question is kind of related to the person in that example. When doing this interpersonally, it makes sense that, someone's expecting to be mirrored exactly, and you do experience a feeling of being understood when that happens. But the question, I guess, is if you mirror someone exactly in a group setting where the parties aren't conscious that this is what you're doing, do people ever find it awkward? That's one. And then the other is maybe a more general version of that, which is, how would you recommend that we use this skill or tactic or whatever we want to call it in a facilitation setting?
So, okay, 2 big questions. So interpersonally, the question of, does it get awkward if you're using this structured thing when you haven't identified that you're going to use a structure? And yes, it can get awkward. And so I'll tell you a few things about that. One is, feel free to say, I've got the structure. Is it okay if I use it? And then that you've got that permission, so you're okay. Another is, one of the things that gets missed in this exercise is that you're not mirroring only because the person gets to know that you heard them. You're also mirroring because it changes if I'm mirroring, it changes what goes on inside me. I actually show up differently. And I've known some folks, and I've done it myself sometimes, where if I thought that speaking the mirror wasn't going to be useful or was going to be awkward, I mirror in my head. So I put myself in that, like I'm listening like I'm going to mirror, even if I know I'm not actually going to say the words. And it activates a very different part of the brain. Bye, Sarah. Thanks for letting us know. And so it changes your presence, even if you aren't going to follow through on the word for word mirror. And then the other thing is, you can get kind of to a halfway point. You say, let me make sure I got that. What I think you said is, and even if it's practically word for word, most of the time that will fit fairly naturally in the conversation. How to use it in facilitation is a little different, in that your role is different. So in interpersonal, you probably want to make sure that you're not rushing things. Like if it feels like it's taking a long time and the person's speaking really slowly, you want to match that pace. As a facilitator, you're trying to get some business done, you're trying to get things through. And so your purpose in mirroring, although I do think there's a huge element of connection in it, you also may be trying to move the meeting along, or you may be, you know, when I facilitate a meeting, I've usually done a lot of prep. So it can be the case that I have an idea of what that person is trying to say because I've talked to them about it before. And I think that the way they say it, the rest of the group isn't getting it. So I may intentionally mirror with different words, but I always go back to them. Is that actually what I know I'm not using your words. Is that what you're saying? Or I do a summary mirror and I always go back and check. So that did I get you piece becomes really important. When facilitating meetings, is there more is less. Because if you go, is there more, then that person ends up dominating. But sometimes you do, is there more, for one of those quieter people that Megan was talking about. So you can use it all those ways. And I think the key element is you want to practice it enough that you have it in your toolbox as a facilitator so that you can use it when it helps. I think the last thing I'll say about when to use it as a facilitator is one of the most powerful experiences I've ever had with mirroring in a facilitator role was when I was in a meeting and someone had a really explosive emotional reaction. And if you're going to mirror them, you need to mirror all of them, including their affect and their swear words. So if someone's really loud and really angry, the mirror is what I heard you say, really loud and really angry. Do not tone down the words. Then in whatever their huge emotion is, they are no longer alone. If you try and do it calm, almost anyone who's so agitated that they're in that emotional outburst place, if somebody comes up to them calmly, they understand that what you're saying is, yeah, well, I'm in control and you need to shut up now. And that does not make them feel heard and better and belonging and whatever. So it's something you probably should practice if you're going to do it. But if you're in that moment, which of course none of us wants to be, and almost all of us are occasionally, where someone is just exploding, mirroring is incredibly powerful if you're willing to mirror the whole thing. Does that was a lot of answers too.
I have a 9-year-old. I think I have plenty of opportunities to practice the last bit there.
That's great.
Right.
Other responses or questions? All right.
I have something. I don't think you can see me, but because I'll do it. My internet's a little unstable, so I'm not using video for that stuff. But
Sure.
What I noticed for, because I've done this, I've done mirroring quite a bit for, I don't know, 40 years or something. And
Wow.
it's always a mind shifter in a certain way, the way it makes you pay attention in a better way. Dale's coming into my world. But what I noticed is that when I was mirrored and heard back exactly what I had said, I suddenly had this more that I realized about myself. So there was like a way that the mirroring settled me into, yes, I was just really hurt about this. So, and then it allowed me to go, oh, there's a deeper thing happening here, which is so cool. And what a gift that is to give somebody, that
Absolutely.
opportunity to be heard and then go deep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I couldn't say it better, but yes, 100%. That's a huge part of the reason why we do it. Yeah. Alexandria.
Well, I was just thinking how if you were, I had a meeting with a group this morning on Zoom, and I was really loving your idea of like a one-word check-in, because we spent too much time on our check-in given the circumstances that are going on. But I thought this is also something that if we had a question that we wanted to do this with people, because you are conscious when you're speaking that you don't want to go on for too long, so that the person with you can mirror. And so sometimes people in our group who might just talk for a long time well, they might or they might not, but then they do have to reverse and listen and repeat what someone else is saying, which I don't think they do much sometimes. So that is good that way.
I agree. And doing this very much like what we did tonight as a meeting starter, whether in Zoom or in person, is one of my favorite things. And there are a few things I think it does. One is you get a whole lot of safety when somebody really hears me. Even if I then go back into a whole room of people and I hardly know the rest of them, or maybe I do, you know, depending on how long your group's been together. But I feel safe because I've had that connection with one other person. So the level of safety in the room increases. And I believe that when we activate this part of our brain that we need for mirroring, it actually stays active. So I think if you do this as a 15-minute exercise at the start of a meeting, that people's capacity for listening continues to be higher throughout the meeting.
Yeah.
And the third thing is that, sort of as you're saying, if I know there's something in the meeting that's going to be challenging or that people need to be heard about, needing to be heard and needing to be heard by everyone is not the same thing. And so if you can use prompts as sort of an icebreaker or meeting starter in a pair that let people process that through, and that thing that Kathy was talking about happens where people realize more about what they think about it or why they value it or why they feel the way they feel about it, that happens for everyone simultaneously in a pair. When they come back to the meeting and you get to that point of the meeting where you're talking about it, people are able to share more concisely, and their need to be heard about it is less because it's been stated some.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Megan.
One observation I want to share is that, I mean, I've been on calls for most of the day starting at 8:30, and I just felt remarkably energized by this and also challenged. You know, the kind of listening that I was doing in a pair was very different from the kind of passive listening that I do in so many other online conversations. It was sort of like a physiological trigger to actually pay attention to the human being who I was in conversation with. And it also just encouraged my feeling of like compassion, which I think would make it a lot easier if we were going to talk about something that might be difficult. And a reflection on a time when I've used something like this before was when, in my living situation, when we had a facilitator to help us through a conflict, and that particular conflict was about like race and inclusion in the house. And so there was somebody who didn't feel heard, and so we did something like this where we slowly mirrored what she said. And people kept literally reflecting back what she was saying, and it helped her to understand that what she was saying was a little bit different than what she actually like needed. And so she was saying that she she basically needed to see more people of color in the house. But some people were responding that like, well, you know, look at all the things we've done. Every time we've had a chance, we've brought in a person of color. And what she actually needed was a person who had her shared experience as an immigrant. And like, we never would have gotten there if we hadn't gone through this really slow mirroring process.
And I love that you use the word slow. Another pushback that we get about this is, but it's so slow, it takes so long. And we actually think that's a lot of why it works, is that it slows us down. So yeah, so those of us who teach it will sort of smile and nod and be like, yep, it's slow, it is. So yeah, and I think that's an important piece, that deep connection can't be rushed. So, yeah. Well, I think that's probably a great place to close us. Karen, do you want to wrap us up?
Sure thing. So, thanks everybody for being here tonight, and thank you for participating. That makes it truly successful. So thank you. And thank you, Karen and Megan, for leading the way. So we have another of these co-housing and the coronavirus next Tuesday, May 12th. And at that time, we will be doing our third community check-in. That's kind of crazy to think about that'll mark the 3-chunk period of this pandemic. So we'll be kind of checking in with everybody and seeing what their current challenges are or what's happening. I want to remind everybody again that it is the mid-year Giving Tuesday, so please, whether it's Coho US or any other nonprofits that you support, whether it's local or national, please, 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 if you can support those, please do. Much appreciated, and yeah, it's a good thing to do. Heart of Community is the online conference coming up May 30th. Registrations are open with early bird pricing. Information on the schedule and the sessions and the speakers and all that good stuff is all on our website.
And community pricing. So this is a great time to talk to your community about, hey, we can get a better deal if we all go in on this together. And in addition to the better deal, you can get those members of the community who maybe wouldn't normally participate, but they might watch a recording of something that was really good. That becomes available to them with a community registration. So this is the time to think about that and do your consensus and get your $250 together.
True, true. So I think with that, I think that's about it.
Thank you. Wonderful.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks so
everyone.
much. Really appreciate it. Good
Good night.
work.
Thank you.